So I'll introduce myself. Thank you everyone for attending today. My name is Laura Oremland. I'm in the NOAA Fisheries Office of Science and Technology, and I'm an education program manager there. I'll turn it over to Kathy for an introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Mitchell. I am a grants management specialist in the Office of Management and Budget at NOAA Fisheries.
Thanks, Kathy. I'll turn it over to Derek.
Hi, everyone. Derek Orner with NOAA Fisheries Management and Budget, branch chief for pretty much all grants that are going out through the agency.
Thanks, Derek. And finally, Rachel.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Silver. I am a contractor in support of NOAA. My title is Citizen Science Researcher with the Office of Science and Technology.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so today we would like to speak to you about the 2025 Inflation Reduction Act, NOAA Fisheries Citizen Science Funding Opportunity. Oops, hold on one second. There we go. Okay, so just to kind of give you a roadmap of what we're going to discuss today, we're just going to start off with some background for the funding opportunity and some basic definitions, what the objectives of the program are, the program priorities, how to submit proposals, especially noting the new grant systems online, award information and funding availability. We'll briefly review the evaluation criteria and provide some information about the project and award period. After that, we'll have a question and answer session, and you can put your questions in the chat as noted before. So just to make sure you can find the funding opportunity, it's available on grants.gov. We've provided the number of the funding opportunity. If you just need to find it through searching at grants.gov, you've misplaced the link. The best thing to do is to do a search on the grants, use the keyword citizen science, and to select the FY 2025 Inflation Reduction Act NOAA Fisheries Citizen Science Funding Opportunity, and to download a grants application package. Or I've provided a direct link at the bottom of the slide here. And just in case we slip into some acronyms, I just want to provide some basic definitions since these terms may be used throughout the presentation. NOFO basically just refers to the Notice of Funding Opportunity, meant to describe the basic funding opportunity for the citizen science competition. NMFS stands for the National Marine Fisheries Service, and IRA stands for the Inflation Reduction Act. And in referring to a fishery stock assessment, that is defined as the scientific process of collecting, analyzing information, and reporting on the condition of a fish stock and estimating its sustainable yield. So just to provide a basic definition before we go any further on what is citizen science, and just to give background, everything I'm reviewing here today will be listed in the funding opportunity on grants.gov. This definition comes from the Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act, and in short, it refers to individuals or organizations who participate voluntarily in the scientific process. That could be collecting the data. It could also be analyzing the data, or in fact, coming up with the questions or developing the research question to explore in the scientific process. There are different types of citizen science, again, also noted in the NOFO. And it's more of a continuum of project types from contributory to collaborative to co-created. A contributory type of citizen science project is designed by scientists, but it's where the volunteers primarily contribute data or undertake data collection type activities. In a collaborative project, it's generally designed by scientists, and members of the public contribute data, but also may take under other steps, which is to refine project design, analyze data, or to disseminate findings. Or finally, at the end of the continuum would be the co-created model, which is where it's designed by scientists together with members of the public. And at least some of the public participants are actively involved in most or all steps of the scientific process. So in terms of why we're doing this funding opportunity, one of the intent is to encourage use of citizen science to support things like federal fishery stock assessments, to help better understand the impacts of climate use through using citizen science to better understand impacts of climate change on fish stocks, as well as better understand the impacts of climate change on fishing communities. And those are the 3 priority areas for proposals in this funding opportunity. But it's also encouraged in all priority areas to involve the fishing community, whether it's recreational or commercial, to use a co-created project design, and whether it's to involve or address underserved and highly vulnerable communities. So again, revisiting what those 3 program priorities are. The first one is to improve a federal fishery stock assessment. The second is to better understand climate change impacts on fish stocks. And the third one is to better understand climate change impacts on fishing communities. And the one thing I will note here in these 3 program priority areas is that this applies only to fisheries species in a federal fishery management plan. That's all 3 areas. We'll talk a little more about that further into the presentation. So let's go over each program priority area individually. So in the first one, which is to improve a federal fishery stock assessment, the idea is to look at citizen science projects that can supplement traditional data sources in one or more of these areas which are identified as data gaps. One is in terms of catch, the second would be size or age composition, the third would be life history, and the fourth would be stock identification and definition. And again, the NOFA will go into a little more detail about that, but it's really, citizen science projects that, can help improve a stock assessment and supplement traditional data sources in one of these listed data gap areas. In the second program priority, which is, I'm going to read exactly from the NOFA, is to increase understanding of current and future impacts of climate change on fish stocks. Funds for this program priority will support citizen science projects that can be used to better understand how fish species may be impacted by changing environmental conditions. An example of such a type of project would be a project that documents shifts in species range or abundance. And in the third program priority, which is to increase understanding of current and future impacts of climate change on fishing communities, the intent is to increase our understanding using citizen science projects to increase understanding of current and future impacts of climate change on fishing communities. So in this area, funds will support citizen science projects that can be used to better understand how fishing communities may be impacted by changing environmental conditions. So for example, projects may address community responses, adaptations to climate-induced changes in the marine ecosystem affecting fishery resources. So again, these 3 program priorities are the areas which this funding opportunity is seeking proposals. Yeah. And again, I want to emphasize for all the program priorities, it applies to stocks, fishery stocks in a federal fishery management plan. In terms of where to find these, the links are provided in the NOFO. I've provided the links here as well, but just to kind of step you through what that means, I'm going to go through the next slides. So the link is going to take you to a page that you'll see these quarterly updates here, and I've circled the link that you want to click on. And you're going to come up with these tables, which will tell you which are the fishery management plan, which stocks are in them. And then even at a smaller level, if you notice the red circle here, if you look at this one for the American Samoa Archipelago Ecosystem, FMP, you'll see an asterisk when you sometimes have a complex, like in this case, flame snapper and ruby snapper complex. When you go to the notes, it will tell you which species are actually included in that, in that fishery complex. So these are just some examples of notes. And if you scroll down, you can just see in most of them, at the top one, the rock sole complex consists of northern rock sole and rock sole. So anyways, this is just to give you a sense of where to find these species, how to search these tables. And certainly if you have questions, you're welcome to reach out. So who can apply? Again, this is listed in detail in the NOFO, but individuals, institutions of higher education, nonprofits, and for-profit organizations, state, local, and Indian tribal governments, as well as foreign public entities or foreign organizations. We also support broadening participation of historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, and institutions that work in underserved areas and indigenous communities. We do want to note that federal agencies and instrumentalities like the Federal Fishery Management Councils are not able to apply. We also want to note that while this is not required, having a NMFS or a NOAA Fisheries partner for a proposal is strongly encouraged. The partner can be from any part of NOAA Fisheries, be it a headquarters office, a regional office, a science center, or a program. If you do, include a NMFS partner in the application, it's recommended that you request a letter from the NMFS collaborator supervisor so that you know that if this proposal is selected, that person has assurances that they can work on can work in whatever capacity they're indicated to support the proposal. But again, we do want to note that federal agencies are not eligible to receive federal assistance under this announcement, but they can be uncompensated partners, project partners. So now what I'm going to step through are the individual application components. There's one optional component, which is a letter of intent, and then there are 6 required components. So let's start with the optional letter of intent. Simply one page document, which is really indicated, it's going to help us as a way to gauge interest and estimate the number of applications in the different program priority areas. Again, it's not required. It's not linking to whether you should submit a full proposal. It's there strictly to help us plan for the review process. So we do strongly recommend submitting the letter of intent. If you do choose to provide one, it's due on Thursday, September 5th, and you would simply email them directly to me, and my email is indicated on the screen here. So now let's go through the required components. To start off basic is the required federal forms ranging from the application for federal assistance to assurances and non-construction programs, the SF 424B, and then the certification regarding lobbying, the CD 511. Applicants may submit the information typically included on these documents through the grants.gov website. So next would just simply be the project summary, two pages with information to include everything from, just basic identifying information from the organization name, the principal investigators, the address, the names of the NMFS partner or partners, should you have one with the application, which of the 3 program priorities for which you are applying, and again, a little about the project, just the objectives and the summary of work to be performed and basic budget information. In terms of the project narrative, this is where you can certainly get into more detail. It would, within that 10-page limit, include things like tables and visual materials. And again, this is where you also want to specify which of the program priorities that your project applies to. Provide a little more detail about the project objectives. And again, this is where it's going to start getting into more detail in terms of an explanation of how the citizen science project you're describing will be used, getting a little more about the volunteers, which group, which region, how do you intend to engage them, a little bit about the data to be collected and why they are needed, who are the end users of the data, what coordination efforts you have planned with the end users, which partners, if any, you have involved in the project in their respective roles. Is the project intended to be 1 or 2 years, or if it's intended to be a long-term project, how you would anticipate sustaining it after the award. And again, what type of project? Is it contributory, collaborative, or co-created, as well as whether there are any funding sources for the project. A little more within this section, you also want to indicate whether there are any permit requirements. Again, how will the project be managed? And just a short overview of the resource qualifications of the project team. Also, you want to indicate any results from prior NOAA or NOAA Fisheries support, and a brief evaluation plan. This isn't, a full, an extensive one, but really just describes in general how the applicant will assess the effectiveness of the project. In the next section, which is sort of abbreviated here as the CV section, again, it's just getting at the overall qualifications of the applicant, and it's where you can include up to 5 CVs for personnel listed on the project. Within the appendices, again, everything that I've mentioned here will be in greater detail in the NOFO, but I do want to highlight within the appendices in the attachment section, within this 20-page limit, there are these three components which are required in that section. The first is an education and outreach plan, no longer than 2 pages, which would include a strategy for how you plan to go about volunteer recruitment and retention. Will it indicate how the volunteers would be trained to ensure data collection quality and fitness for use, as well as how you intend to communicate project results to both volunteers and end users of the data. It should also include a quality assurance project plan, no more than 2 pages, which is a plan to ensure the scientific quality, data credibility for the project. And it should also include descriptions or metadata. There is a link here which takes you to some examples that EPA provides on what a template for a quality assurance project plan. It's certainly not required. It's just intended as an example for what type of information you would want to include in the quality assurance project plan. But beyond what we're requiring, anything we're requiring is stated in the NOFO. And finally, this section would also include the a data management plan no longer than 2 pages. And again, the details on what to include there would be found on pages 8 or 9 of the attachment for the Data and Publication Sharing Directive for NOAA grants, cooperative agreements, and contracts. And finally, the budget narrative, which does not have a page limit, would certainly describe the total project costs, which are the amount of funds required to accomplish what is proposed in the project description, along with a detailed table with a budget narrative to support the requested items or activities, included like salaries, benefits, travel, supplies, etc. And in this description here of the application process, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Kathy.
Thank you, Laura. Over the next few slides, I'll discuss a little bit about the application process. So once you determine that you're eligible, you'll want to get registered in 3 separate systems. You want to get registered in SAM.gov, grants.gov, and also ERA Commons. The SAM.gov registration should be done first, but grants.gov and ERA can be done concurrently. All registrations must be complete and up to date prior to you being able to submit your application. The complete registration process for all 3 systems can take several weeks. We have here 4 to 6. I've heard up to 8 weeks in some cases. So we really want everyone to begin this process as soon as possible. Next slide, please. We strongly encourage all prospective applicants to begin the required registrations as quickly as possible, as I just mentioned. Submission due dates will not be extended because of registration delays in these systems. Submissions received after the due date will be considered late and unfortunately won't be accepted. If you are eligible and you don't have access to the internet, please reach out to myself or Laura, and we can give you that guidance if you'd like to submit a paper application. Next slide, please. So the Citizen Science Funding Opportunity will award 3 to 8 projects ranging between $75,000 up to $200,000 per project. Each project will have a 1 or a 2-year period of performance beginning in 2025. The maximum federal investment is approximately $600 for all of the awards we will be funding. We do not anticipate funding project proposals that request greater than $200,000. Next slide, please. You should propose either a 1-year project or a 2-year project. The start date for your project must begin on the first day of the month and end on the last day of the month. The earliest start date for your project will be April 2025, the 1st of April 2025, unless discussed previously with myself or Laura. Next slide, please. Selected projects will be funded as cooperative agreements. This refers to substantial involvement by NOAA. This generally means that NOAA staff will assist, guide, coordinate, in some cases collaborate or participate in your project activities in a partnership role. We will not assume direction or take on any sort of prime responsibility or dominate any of your objectives or activities. The dominant role and the primary responsibility will still lie with you as the recipient, although there might be some tasks or activities that NOAA staff may share with your project staff. Next slide, please. So optional letters of intent should be submitted by next month, Thursday, September 5th. That's probably about 2 to 3 weeks from now. So you want to begin thinking about those optional letters of intent. And proposals must be received by Monday, November 4th. I think, do I have another? Okay. Laura, is this your slide or my slide?
I think this is back to me now.
Okay, turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. So, once you've gone through the process, the next question is, how will my project be evaluated? And all the applications will be reviewed for merit as outlined in the NOFO, but the specific categories for evaluation will be in terms of importance and relevance, technical merit, which includes the approach and methodology, the overall qualifications of the team, the outreach and education, and project costs. So just to summarize some of the key takeaways here, in terms of deadlines, the optional letters of intent should be submitted by Thursday, September 5th, 2024. All proposals are due by midnight Eastern Time on Monday, November 4th, 2024. And please note that new registrations take time. Registrations for all three systems, SAM.gov, grants.gov, and ERA Commons can take, as Kathy indicated, 4 to 6 weeks or longer. So begin this activity as soon as possible, starting with the SAM.gov, though you can do them concurrently. And I've posted up here, contact information for myself and Kathy in case you need to reach us with any questions. And with that, we're going to begin the question and answer session. So I think Lisa will guide the next point.
Hi, great. Thank you so much, Laura. Go ahead and put your webcam on. Audience, we have lots of time to answer your questions, and I know that many of you have started asking them. If you do have a question, there's a separate Q&A chat on your right side that you're welcome to put your questions in there, and you can ask them anonymously if you prefer not to have your name go across the screen as we ask them. I'm going to go ahead and ask a question that was put into the chat by Angela first. This question asks, it says, my group is interested in invertebrate, northeastern Atlantic sea stars specifically, bycatch health from fishermen. Is it possible to apply if our target species isn't in the stock list, but greatly affects their environment?
Yeah, I'll take that question. I would come at that angle, or come at that question from two angles here. I'd read in detail on the program priorities. This case looks like it's. Let me just pull that question up again one more time. I think I see that one. But it looks like it probably falls into the category of improve a federal fisheries stock assessment, although I imagine it could potentially be in one of the others as well. But I would come at that from two angles. I would come at it from, how well it fits into the program priority. I mean, can you answer that question? And then, it applies to species in a federal fishery management plan. So how well it answers both, how well it both addresses the program priority and the target species would be the way I would come at that question. If you have specific questions on a project, I think Kathy and I are happy to try to answer those individually as appropriate.
And just to remind you guys, both Laura and Kathy's emails are in the chat. We did get another question in the chat, which asks, will feedback be given if an LOI is submitted?
The answer to that one would be no. The LOI is really there just to gauge help us plan for the review process. It's not an indicator of whether somebody should submit a full proposal or not.
We're getting questions about interest in your slides. Can you address how people can access information for that?
So first question, the way I would answer that is, first and foremost, all the information we're providing in the slides can be found in the federal funding opportunity, the notice of funding opportunity. Derek, would you want to weigh in here on the slides?
Sure, Laura. Yeah, all the information is in the NOFO, as Laura stated. For the presentation, we took a lot of the information out of the NOFO and just put it in different formats, on the slides. But all the information is already in the NOFO. Some of the links are in there, as well as all the dates that we covered.
Great. I'm going to ask some of the questions that are coming through the Q&A chat. Let me see this first one. Can this opportunity support citizen science that enables broader water quality improvements to watersheds that feed key fisheries, rather than specifically for fisheries management?
The opportunity support citizen science that enables broader water quality improvements to watersheds that feed. I think, again, the way I would come at this question would be, how is it going to address one of the key program priorities, whether it's improve a stock assessment, increase our understanding of impacts on fisheries related to climate change or fishing communities. I think that's the question I would always go back to. And another way to approach those types of questions would be to also look at the evaluation criteria in a little more depth, which is outlined. I can provide the specific section in the answer or in the Q&A section. But looking at, again, that's the guidance reviewers will get to evaluate the proposals and how well, again, some specific points in the evaluation criteria. Sorry, I've got to flip through it here, but would be something like, how well does the project address its selected program priority area? So again, those would be the types of questions I would go ask yourself if you were a reviewer how well it's answering one of those program priorities, and then I'd take a detailed look at the evaluation criteria and see how it would fit. But again, I think if there are specific project questions that, again, we're happy to take additional questions.
Thank you.
Individually.
This next question asks, what are other citizen science projects that have been conducted in the past that relate to the NOFO's objectives? Are there any?
I'm not sure if the question being asked, this is the first time we've ever had a NOAA-specific citizen science funding opportunity. So in that context, I can't really speak to any other projects that have been funded since this is the first one. I can provide a link in the chat to where, what types of citizen science projects, we've done in fisheries, just, funded as an agency. But I can't speak to anything funded by the NOFO since this is the first one. But I'll put some links to our NOAA Fisheries citizen science and our catalog of NOAA citizen science projects in the chat.
Thank you. This question asks anonymously, is this limited to MUS?
MUS, I'm not sure. Oh, unless that means US.
Oh, it might. I wasn't sure if it was an acronym I wasn't familiar with. If you could clarify the question, we can re-ask the question.
Yeah, I might need clarification, and if that means, are they talking about eligibility for applicants? Maybe if that person can just write in just to clarify what the question is and make sure we're answering it correctly.
This next question asks, will feedback be given if LOIs are submitted?
And again, Derek and Kathy, maybe I'll let you all weigh in here as well since I answered the last time.
Yeah, so I'll jump in on this one, Laura. And at this point, no. The letters of intent really are to give us a sense of interest in the program. The way that our competitive programs run is once we receive applications, as Laura mentioned, they go through a technical merit review. So each full application needs 3 merit reviews. In order to start lining up reviewers and to gauge interest in, are we expecting 10 applications versus potentially 100 applications, the letters of intent really are, kind of set us up so we can, move as expeditiously as we can in that review process. We are planning on providing input on those. We also are really letting you know that, don't wait for us to respond and let you know that yes or no, the project is, good for the program. Again, these are merely for us to kind of set up the review process to gauge interest. So once you submit the letter of intent, please continue to work on development of the full proposal so you can submit that on time.
Thank you. I'm going to share the next question. Andrea asks, can a proposal address a particular question with a planning phase and not specifically do the actual research? For example, can our young fishing community utilize this funding for a planning design phase, not an implementation phase?
I don't see it. I mean, I'm going to ask Kathy and Derek to weigh in here, but I don't see any reason what would prevent that. And again, the key question is, can you explain how it addresses one of the 3 program priorities? And if that planning phase of the project, you can explain how it addresses the program priority. I don't see any reason why that couldn't be submitted.
We have another question that was upvoted by 2 other people. Can the proposals include budget allocated to participant compensation, for example, fishermen's participation, or must the citizen science be voluntary and unpaid?
Yeah, no, and that question has come up. So the way in two-part answer to that. The way we are defining volunteers are in the context of this follows from the Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act, which means that they are, they're voluntarily participating and they are not compensated. But one thing we do want to indicate is that in terms of the budget, if you can include things that would, perhaps remove barriers to participation. If, transportation costs of getting to and from a, volunteer site, would be possible, or, something that would remove barriers to participation, but not compensating the volunteers directly. If you need more clarification, let me know. But that would be one way to think about it.
This is kind of related. This asks, can funds be used to reimburse fishermen who may participate in data collection, or is that not considered citizen science?
I think in the context, it wouldn't fall. Again, compensating somebody specifically for their time would take it out of the citizen science definition that we're applying from the Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act. But if you do want to provide some incentives, such as, things that would remove barriers to participation. I'm trying to think, transportation, I couldn't provide an exhaustive list. I'm just trying to provide some examples. Transportation costs of getting to and from, maybe fuel costs. Again, things that would remove barriers to participation, but wouldn't compensate somebody specifically for their time. I know Derek or Kathy, is there anything you might add to that? No.
Okay. This is an anonymous question that has gotten an upvote. What's the success rate from last year's grants?
This is the first one we're doing, so I guess we'll know what our batting average is after this whole process is done. So.
This next question says, I don't see any Great Lakes fish species on the federally managed list. Am I missing something?
That's a great question. I don't think that you are missing something in terms of federally. There may be some salmon species. I'd have to take a second look whether there are any salmon species that might apply. But I don't think so. But I think the main question to ask, I think this question has come up before, which is, are other species, whether they're state managed or, something other than in the federal list, could they apply? And again, the way I would answer that question is going back to the program priorities. How well does it answer that? Are you, again, I'm not trying to provide an exhaustive list, but is this something that you're trying to do a proof of concept on? and on a species that's not in the federal fishery management plan, but with the intent being to improve a stock assessment, by that, through that test. I think these are things you've got to ask yourself along the way. Does it answer the program priority? But it all goes back to that question. But in terms of the list, I don't think you're missing a Great Lakes species. But if you're looking at species outside of something that are in that federally managed, the Federal Fishery Management Plan species list, again, how does it go back to the program priority would be the key question to ask.
Great. Just as a reminder to everybody, there is a separate Q&A chat. I encourage you to use that instead of the audience chat for your questions. But if you did put a question in the audience, I will address them once we get through the Q&A. Let me see. So it was asked anonymously. Are letters of support for all partners outside of NMFS partner supervisor LOS encouraged/allowed for this grant?
I don't know that they're required, but I think encouraged, just to show that they are able to take on that role. Derek, would you? I don't know if you wanted to add on to that, or Kathy.
I will say that letters of support typically are allowed. A lot of times we don't necessarily send those letters out during the review process. We don't want to inundate our reviewers with a bulk of letters of support that come from miscellaneous entities, or just kind of form letters or form letters of support. So they are allowable, but they are for the program staff only. They don't go out as part of the review.
Great, thank you. If people attending this webinar are comfortable, could we introduce ourselves in the chat to each other in case there are potential collaborations/connections? I'll answer that. You're welcome to use the audience chat. Keep in mind that there's about 100 people online right now, so you might, it's just going to take up a lot of space, but you're welcome to do that. This next question asks if one of you can drop a link to the federally managed stocks into the chat. That would be really helpful.
I'll do that right now.
Great. Okay. Next question asks, is a financial match for funding required?
Somebody want to take that? Well, I'm sure. Grab the link.
I'll answer and say, federal financial match is not required, for this program. It's allowable, and you can come in with any, whether it's actual cash or in-kind, portions of the program, but it is not a requirement of the program.
Thank you. Scott asks, are organizations limited to one submission?
I'm going to pass that to Kathy and Derek.
We've been getting this question a lot. Derek, do you want to?
Yeah, so we didn't include any limitation in the NOFO itself. So if you're part of an organization that submits 1, 3, 5, that's acceptable. We would ask that you kind of watch the percent of time that you include on your proposals or in your applications. For example, if you request 100% of your time on one project and 100% of your time on a second project, if both projects were to be supported, that's 200% of your time. We can't support that. We can only support up to 100% of any one individual's time. So just keep that part of the process or the part of the question in mind when you submit your applications.
Thank you. This next question is from Jacob. Is there any priority given to organizations that work with NOAA-managed national marine sanctuaries?
I think Derek and I are both shaking our heads no on that one.
Yeah, no, we're not giving priority to any one entity, organization. The evaluation criteria in the NOFO, the scoring system that's been identified there, is how all the proposals will be reviewed and looked at equally before they go into kind of the final selection process.
Are main fisheries commissions eligible to apply? Example, ASMFC.
Yes, they're eligible to apply. The only ones that can't really are the fishery management councils.
Could you repeat the maximum budget for any single proposal? You mentioned this in the talk, but I didn't catch the number.
$200,000 is the max amount.
This question is, how is this NOFO connected to the recent decision by NEFMC to address the priority of converting our trial surveys to industry-conducted surveys? Is there a correlation?
Yeah, no, none whatsoever. It's funded under the Inflation Reduction Act under a priority known as the Essential Data Acquisition. So it's looking at new and innovative ways we can supplement our existing data collections and address the impacts of, or better understand the impacts of climate change on fisheries. So no connection at all.
This person asks, your marketing for the grant says funding will increase diversity of scientific observations to prepare for a changing climate. How broad is your description of diversity? I use an art-based research methodology. Are you open to this?
I think the best way to answer that question is, I don't, the word diversity in that context, I'm not sure if that was done in the context of the NOFO, but the bottom line is I think any approach can be considered provided it meets or addresses one of the program priorities. So I'm sorry to keep repeating myself on that one, but I think that's the way to approach the question is what the project I'm proposing, does it address one of these program priorities? And that would be the question to ask. So, but it's not limited to specific types of methodologies. The only thing it does specify, for example, in the first program priorities, which data gaps related to stock assessments to address.
Thank you. I put the next question out a little early, apologies. Compensation can also be viewed as a stipend, correct?
Correct.
Excellent. If our proposed project aligns with priority 2, increasing understanding of current and future impacts of climate change on fish stocks, but studies a species not on the federally managed stock list, would that be an eligible project?
I don't believe so. Again, if I'm looking at the way we've described it, it's to better increase our understanding of current and future impacts of climate change on fish stocks, and those fish stocks which are on federal fishery management plans. So unless you can tie it back to that, for example, if you were going to propose understanding the current or future impact of climate change on a right whale, I don't know how you would tie it back to that. But again, if you can make a tie back to it, I think that's really the key question. But it's harder to understand how you would make that tie.
Angel asks, those who submit the optional letter of intent must wait for an answer to proceed with full proposals, or not?
No, you don't need to wait. It's really only used, the primary purpose of the LOI is to gauge our, how to prepare for our review process, not to recommend a full proposal or to encourage or discourage that.
Will any particular type of citizen science project, contributory, collaborative, or co-created, be prioritized or receive higher evaluation?
Great question. We do say at the beginning of the NOFO, right before the program priorities, that projects which use a co-created design are encouraged, but there is no criteria there's no evaluation criteria that does give extra points for that.
Thank you. Here's another compensation question. Could fishermen be compensated for catch related to the goals of the project or other costs such as gas, dock fees, etc., given the prohibition on compensation for participants?
This is one I might need to think about a little more and maybe get back to you on. At a quick glance, as we're talking about other costs like gas, dock fees, etc., those sound like things like providing funding for that would remove barriers to participation. Compensated for catch, I'd have to think about that. I'm thinking probably not, but I'd want to. Yeah, I'm thinking probably not on that one.
Oops. This person says, thanks for your answer on participant compensation. It's difficult to do fisheries engagement work, one of the priorities of the call, without compensation for burden time. So a comprehensive list on allowed incentives would be helpful. Just an incentive. This question from Tyler asks, are there fisheries of priority inside of the FMA species list that NOAA is more likely to offer this award to?
There's no priority species we've identified in the NOFO. So other than indicating this relates to federal fishery management plan species, there's no priority to any particular species given.
Okay. Let me put this on the screen. Thank you for all your wonderful questions, everybody. Lots of questions here. Misha asks, we are discussing climate change's effects of fisheries. Would it also include that which creates climate change, such as petrochemical plants and LNG facilities, specifically shrimp in a large shipping channel next to increasing industry?
I think I'd have to get back on that one. I'm sorry, I don't have a quick answer to that one. That one I think I'll have to follow back up on.
No problem. This question asks, will this be an annual NOFO, or is future funding cycles dependent on the next year?
No sense of whether there'll be another one or not. I wish, I don't have any insights on that, but we have this one at current.
Excellent. So those are the questions that were in the Q&A chat. I'm going to see if I can capture all of the questions that were asked in the audience chat. And forgive me if I skip over one. I'm going to go ahead and start reading a couple of them. Give me one moment. Okay. Brandy asks, are the citizen scientists considered volunteers? Or can we plan to pay? Oh, wait, I asked that question. Apologies. Here, this question is from David. It says, I'm involved with Atlantic bluefin tuna. You have stipulated two important criteria be met. One, the species has a fishery management plan. And two, the species is subject to a period stock assessment. In the case of Atlantic bluefin, we no longer have stock assessments. Instead, we're using management strategy evaluation. Would this be a problem?
I feel like I need to digest that question a little more before I answer that. I want to give that careful thought before I respond on that one.
No problem.
Yeah, Lisa, if you could send me that one, and
sure.
That would be great.
Afterwards, I can send that. This next question asks, will any particular type of citizen science project be, actually that was asked. Would this apply to software associated with fisheries industry?
I don't have a specific yes, no type of answer for that. It would all come back to, does the software, this software-based project, again, how does that address, how would that address the program priority that you're targeting? Mm-hmm. So that would be the key question back.
Next question asks, can you provide an example of a good co-creative design program?
Yeah, I think there was an example that, and this would also fall under the guise of collaborative fisheries research, but in the same vein, I think the California Collaborative Fisheries Research Program might provide an example where they were trying to evaluate the efficacy of MPAs on the West Coast, and the program design was designed collaboratively with fishermen and scientists in terms of the study and the approach. I believe, I don't know if there's a way to contact that person, but there's a way to provide some publications or at least a link to that program. So I think looking up the California Collaborative Fisheries Research Program might be a good example.
Excellent, thank you. Andrea asks, please clarify for the audience that fishermen who would potentially participate in a project can receive a stipend for their participation, a different form of compensation.
Please clarify for the audience that fishermen who would potentially. I think what we were trying to say is, if I'm understanding the question, is that we were not, in terms of what you could or could not put in a budget, in terms of, I think what we were trying to say is we do not advise putting in a stipend for a volunteer in the budget. But if you want to provide funding for mechanisms that reduce barriers to participation for your volunteers, that would be acceptable. Because I'm rereading this question for the audience, that fishermen who would potentially participate in a project can receive a stipend for their participation, a different form of compensation. So I don't know that we were talking about receiving compensation, but rather, we could provide, the budget could allow for costs that reduce barriers to volunteer participation. I don't know if Derek or Kathy, is there anything you'd add? No.
Okay. We got another question in the audience chat. Can you elaborate on volunteers and the definition of citizen science? Can a nonprofit receive money for salary to collect data?
I think that the project, the PIs can receive money for salary or a stipend to conduct the project. That's okay. In terms of definition on volunteers and definition of citizen science, I'm going to put a link to the Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act and which section we pulled that from. That's also in the NOFO, but we took that directly from the Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act, so I'll put the link in the chat there.
Thank you, Laura. Here's a couple more questions that came in through the Q&A chat. Are there any constraints to be aware of if the project includes machine learning alongside human citizen science efforts?
I on the top of my head, I can't think of any constraints. And again, it would just all go back to how does that project, use citizen science, and how does it address the program priority? That I think those are the way that would be the best way to evaluate that question.
Here's a nice comment, less of a question, more of a comment. Excited to see a funding call for citizen science by NOAA. Hoping some more species/geography opportunities come in the future. Appreciate the Q&A. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks. Yeah.
And this question comes from Jacob. Can citizen science data be qualitative as well as quantitative? When integrating traditional ecology knowledge from tribal partners, sometimes baseline data is not quantitative.
Yeah. Yep. I absolutely.
It looks like that might be our last question. Audience, again, thank you so much for all these incredibly helpful questions for everybody.
At least I'm getting the definition from the Citizen Science Act. Sorry, just gonna.
No problem. As we wrap up here, do any of you have any last comments?
Just thank you for everyone. Thank you for your interest in this brand new funding opportunity. I put our email addresses in the chat, myself and Laura, if you have any additional questions. And please don't forget to begin to register in either sam.gov, grants.gov, or ERA before you begin to put together your proposal. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yep. Also, I just wanted to add that I've added the YouTube link to the NOAA Library YouTube channel. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded in a few hours in case you wanted to watch it again or have somebody, somebody who might want to watch it as well. There is one question that just came in. It says here, will there be a budget template?
May turn that over to Derek and Kathy here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're referring, there's two different pieces that go in the budget and the application. As Laura mentioned early on, one of the federal forms is the SF424A that has a list of maybe 8 to 10 budget cost categories. Personnel and fringe, expected travel, supplies, equipment, different categories that you break out your budget into those categories. Laura also mentioned the budget narrative, and that's where you kind of get a little bit more detail. So as opposed to just providing, say $10,000 for equipment, you're actually providing the breakout of what that equipment is, how much it costs per unit. So there's no specific format per se, but just you need to be able to provide the kind of the narrative or the justification for the budget in the budget narrative.
There was one last question from David that came in through the audience chat. It asks, how will we obtain answers to questions that could not be answered in this call? If you did not ask the question anonymously, your question will be sent to our speakers today who can answer your question directly. Unfortunately, if you have a specific question that you are interested in and did not get answered, but you did not ask the question, I would encourage you to email Laura or Kathy directly. All right, well, that looks like it's the last question. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today and asking such thorough questions about this opportunity. Again, I put in the link to the NOAA Library YouTube channel, and I hope that you will link to it later on today, send it to those who could not join us. I really appreciate everyone joining us to learn more about this funding opportunity. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Take care.